Welcome to today's lesson on place value through the thousandths place. Today we're going to be discussing what thousandths are. That's right, it sounds like thousand, but it has a THS at the end. That means it's less than one whole. Confused? Let me help you out. Right here we have a decimal. Every number that's to the right of that decimal represents less than one whole. Every number that's to the left of this decimal represents one or more whole. Let's talk about money. If I were to have $2 whole, I would put a 2 in the ones place to represent 2 complete dollars. But let's say I had $2.25. 25 cents is not one whole dollar. It's less than one whole. So this 25 after the decimal is telling me that I have less than one whole. I have a part of a whole. And that's the purpose of a decimal. To begin today's lesson, let's discuss place value using a decimal. In the middle of our screen here, I'm going to write a decimal for you. And we're first going to start talking about the place values that are to the left of the decimal. These are going to be our whole numbers that we're going to be representing. So to the left of the decimal, we have our ones place, we have the tens place, we have our hundreds place, and I want you to notice that each time we move one place value to the left, the amount that this number represents is 10 times larger than it was before. So if I have a 3 in the ones place, that represents 3 wholes. Now if I move that 3 to the tens place, I now have 3 10 times, so I have a value of 30 in this place value. If I were to move it 10 times greater, or one place value to the left again, I would now represent 300 wholes in this place value. So let's see, if we were to go over one more place value to the thousands place, we would represent 10 times greater than 100, which would be 1,000. So if we had a 3 in this place value, this would represent 3 thousandths. Now that we've discussed to the left of the decimal, what happens when you move to the right of a decimal? Well, anytime you have a number that is to the right of a decimal, it is going to be less than one whole, or part of a whole. So let's look at our first place value to the right of the decimal. Now remember, anytime we move to the left of the decimal, our number got 10 times greater. Well, when you're moving the opposite direction, you're going to do the opposite. Your number is going to get divided by 10. So instead of multiplying to the left, we're going to start dividing when you move to the right. So 1 divided by 10 is going to equal 1/10. So we call this the tenths place. If we move one more place value over, or if we divide 1/10 by 10 again, then we now have the 100ths place. And notice that I said 100ths with a THS at the end. That means that we're working with decimals, that it's part of a whole. And if we move one more place value over, or we divide 1/100th by 10 again, then we now get the thousandths place. Each number represents 1/1000th. So if I were to have a 2 in the tenths place, that means that I have 2 tenths. If I were to put a 4 in the hundredths place, that means it would be 4 hundredths. And if I were to put a 5 in the thousandths place, this would represent 5 thousandths. Now that we have reviewed what place value means, let's look at some examples and see if you can tell me what each place value represents. So let's look at the number 35 and 146 thousandths. Can you tell me which number is in the ones place? That's right, the 5 is in the ones place. What about the tens place? Good, we have a 3 in the tens place. Now as for the tricky part, let's look past the decimal. Can you tell me which number is in the tenths place? That's right, I added a THS to the end of tenths. That means it's a decimal or part of a whole. So we have a 1 in the tenths place. What about the 6? What place value does the 6 represent? Well done, the 6 is in the thousandths place. And that leaves a 4 in the hundredths place. Let's see if we can take this one step further. Do you think that you could compare this number to another number and see which one is bigger? Let's see. What if I asked you to compare 35 and 146 thousandths to 35 and 99 thousandths? Ooh, this one's tricky. All right, just like you compare whole numbers, when you're working with decimals, you're still going to compare the same way. So your first step is to make sure that each of the place values are lined up. It's sometimes difficult when you're working with decimals to line up the place values. So a good rule of thumb, always line up your decimals. And that's going to put your ones place in line as well as your tenths place and so on. So first thing, we're going to look at the largest number. So that's the furthest number to the left. So the top number and the bottom number both have a 3 in the tens place. So now we need to move on to the ones place to see if we can compare these two numbers and find out which one is larger. Well, it looks like in the ones place we still have a 5 for both numbers. So now let's go ahead and let's move on to the tenths place. Alright, here we have a difference. In 35 and 146 thousandths, we have a 1 in the tenths place. Whereas in 35 and 99 thousandths, we have a 0 in the tenths place. That means that our top number is the larger number. Alright, here's a challenge for you. I want you to organize these four numbers in order from least to greatest. We have 9, 5/10ths, 1/1000th, and 300ths. Alright, here we go. We know when we're organizing numbers from least to greatest, we want to line up our decimals first. So let's go ahead and let's put our 9 first. Now since 9 is a whole number and is not part of a whole, the decimal is going to come after the number 9. So I'm actually going to put a 0 in the tenths place so that we can have it as a placeholder when we're comparing the numbers. Now let's look at 5/10ths. We have a 0 in the ones place and 5/10ths. We have 1/1000th, so we have a 0 in the ones place. And we have 1/1000th. And lastly, we have 300ths. Okay, our first step, we need to look at the largest place value and compare that first. So here we only have one number that is greater than 0 in the ones place. So that means that 9 is our largest number. So I'm going to write my 9 over here because remember we're organizing from least to greatest. So that means that 9 is the greatest. So now we still have 3 more numbers to fill in. Okay, so we're done with the ones place. Let's move on to our next place value, the tenths place. Well, we only have one number greater than 0 in the tenths place. So that is our next largest number. So I'm going to put my 5/10ths before the 9. And now I move on to the hundredths place. I only have one number greater than 0 in the hundredths place. So that is my next largest number, is 300ths. And then that leaves 1/1000th as my smallest number. So we have now organized these numbers from least to greatest. Let's take a moment to review what we've learned in today's lesson. First, we learned about different place values. We know that to the right of the decimal, we have the tenths place, the hundredths place, and the thousandths place. To the left of the decimal was review. We had the ones place, the tens place, the hundreds place, and the thousands place. Now remember, when we had a THS at the end of the word, like tenths, hundredths, thousandths, that meant we were talking about the numbers to the right of the decimal that were part of a whole. Next, when we're comparing decimals or ordering them from least to greatest, we need to make sure that we line up the decimals. So if we wanted to compare 3 wholes with 5 tenths with 2 hundredths, we would need to line up each of the numbers with the decimals. So you'd have the decimal for 3, you'd have the decimal for 5 tenths, and you'd have the decimal for 2 hundredths. Then, when comparing the numbers, just like you would with whole numbers, you start with the largest amount first and work your way over. So since none of these other numbers has a number that's greater than 0 in the ones place, 3 is the largest number. And in our next place value, there's only one number that has greater than 0 in the tenths place. So that means that 5 tenths is the next smallest number. And then that leaves us with 2 hundredths. So we have now organized these numbers in order from least to greatest.